Hello, guys, and welcome to the Last Edit Podcast, a podcast on film starring yours truly, Silver Hawkins, and my wonderful friend.
Citizen Sleeve, hello there.
As you may or may not know, each week we discuss a different film, and we sort of alternate each week by choosing, by each choosing one. And this week has been my choice, and I've chosen the 1957 Stanley Kubrick film Paths of Glory, which is broadly acknowledged as being one of the finest war films or anti-war films ever made. It's a film that ranks fairly highly on the lists of a lot of film academics, but isn't often talked about in popular discourse, I find. So I thought it was worth taking a look at and talking about. Now, it's set in 1916. It is, for once, not a World War II movie coming out of Hollywood. It is a film about World War One. It's set in France, and it's about really the French army. It takes place during a battle where, leading up to the battle, a French general is told that he needs to take a hill that's being held and is fortified by the Germans. And he's initially reluctant, says there's no way my men can do it. They're simply too battered. They're too bruised. What you're asking is impossible. And then the general starts dangling a promotion in front of him. We're going to give you command of an entirely new division. And another star for your shoulder, and then all of a sudden he starts, it may not be that impossible. And then he goes to inspect the front lines and inspect the German fortifications, and he orders the attack with Colonel Dax, played by Kirk Douglas, who is the immediate battle commander of the 701st Division, or Regiment. And they attack, but their attack fails, and they retreat. And the French general is so outraged that he basically orders the artillery regiment to bombard his own troops, and then charges the troops who retreated and survived the battle with cowardice. He is first intent upon basically decimating the regiment by shooting every 10th man, but is then brought down to basically having each company three companies choose three men to then be court-martialed for cowardice and shot. And the court-martial then goes on and has its outcome, and that's basically the film in a nutshell. So yeah, you'd seen it before. How long ago?
Probably when I first came across Kubrick. So I think 2001 was the first Kubrick film I probably saw.
Right.
And then I went back and started watching pretty much everything to Kubrick, obviously. So I think probably about the same time I watched The Killing for the very first time. But I've seen The Killing since, whereas I don't think I've seen Paths of Glory since I first saw it. So I think I've only ever seen it the once. It holds up really well. It's Kubrick's fourth film, and you can already see the visual motifs and the wonderful dollies he uses, and the long takes, which not many directors often use, and his particular thematics and style, and even the start of the symmetricity he often uses within a lot of his frames. Even actors, Joe Turkel, for instance, is in it and plays a private, Anu, and he obviously then later plays the barman in The Shining. And just these little telltale signs of an emerging Kubrick, the style, the authenticity of the way he's shot, and a lot of the shots of the actual war itself are very documentary style almost. They have
Very
that
much so.
grittiness about them. The way that, especially when they're charging towards that hill for the first time, and we're side on, looking at the soldiers emerging from the wire, trying to cross into no man's land, and this a really amazing dolly tracking shot which just holds and holds and holds, which is synonymous with the kind of stuff he would go on to do later. But yeah, I just think it holds up incredibly well for a film set in 1957, which both is it's a difficult one in terms of because it's trying to represent this company that is basically being scapegoated because of the error of commanders. And it's a very anti-war film. It's not a film that glorifies any part of war. It's a film that in many ways denounces the inequality of war. And we see that through its mise-en-scène as well. We get this juxtaposition throughout the film of the opulence and baroque French villa that these guys are basically, all the commanders, all the hoi polloi of the army are there, and then we get the juxtaposition of the dirt and the trenches and the real soldiers.
Yeah,
exactly, and everything's constrained, and even in the dialogue shots in the chateau are shot really wide, so we can take in the splendor of these surroundings that the officers live in, as opposed to all the grunts and the privates in the rest of the army. Performance-wise, I think was Kirk Douglas is Kirk Douglas. I don't think I've seen him in a bad film. And obviously this is pre-Spartacus as well, so we go on to work with Kubrick and again in another bloody amazing epic. But he's great in it, and there's moments of subtlety as well, especially towards the end when he's the defending lawyer in the court case, and some of the little nuances, and the fact he knows whatever he's trying to do to help these soldiers is just not working. The amount of different things he tries to do, new evidence appears, he tries to coach them into what to say, he tries to outplay the prosecutor, but nothing really works, and that's why this is a bit of a slice of reality of war rather than a typical Hollywood bombastic spectacle of war that we'd often see. It's quite snappy as well. I didn't think it was only going to be an hour and a half. I thought it would be... It's a Kubrick film. For Christ's sake, why isn't it 3.5 hours long?
It is. Yeah, it's really quick, which is like the pacing is really, really great. Like there's not an ounce of fat here at all.
There's no wasted
really well
scenes.
Trimmed. Yeah, really well trimmed. And
nothing superfluous.
One of the things that stands out immediately is the fact that it's shot in black and white. Which is, it's from 1957, but it was a point in time when like color epics.
Ben-Hur. Exactly.
This same year, Paths of Glory came out the same year as Bridge Over the River Kwai, which was a color epic. So that's partially a stylistic decision by Kubrick, and that's partially to sort of evoke these the footage we actually have of World War One, where and that's immediately apparent in the first scene where the 701st first go over the top and storm over into no man's land. Like that looks. Sorry, Mike just tipped over. That looks pretty much exactly like the historical images from World War One that we have.
That kind of movie-based stock footage that you often see is almost
Precisely.
Perfectly matched. Yeah. Exactly. Even in the tone of the grey as well. It really reflects that kind of the stuff that people at home would be getting. That kind of footage back of the war going on off in France. I also think, it's interesting that this film was primarily funded relatively well. It was like $1 million budget, which for the time wasn't actually that much. Films had started getting bigger and bigger in budget terms. Yeah. But because they got Kirk Douglas, because he liked the script so much, they managed to kind of secure that finance, which is why I think the war sequences in particular, there is some anomalies because the film is so old. Like when a soldier gets, when he's actually charging over and leading the men. And you just see one fall now and again, or one will just drop on the spot, and there's no bullets or squibs because the era. And for a lot of audience that could be a little bit odd, but the actual production values, the explosions going off either side, the ambience of what they've created, and the size of the sets, given the amount of long takes that Kubrick likes to use, really impressive.
Yeah, and but the charge towards Anthill is really like. The noise of it, with all the explosions and stuff, this sort of cacophony of noise, I think it's really effective. The only thing I was kind of missing was screaming. Like there's no screaming at all. Yeah. They're just basic explosions is the full music. But the music, which is also really solid throughout the film, is completely cut out for the battle sequences. There's no like rousing score or anything. It's just silent. It's just the gunfire and the explosions. Are the only sound that's there. I think it's important to note that actually the movie opens with the Marseillaise, which is that's a pretty important commentary, I think, because this is a movie that has very significant commentary on patriotism and nationalism. And the Marseillaise sort of occurs as a motif throughout the film, occasionally very subtly. And the Marseillaise, of course, to those who don't know, is the French national anthem, derived from the French Revolution. So yeah, I think it's just a really amazing film. I mean, watching it again, I think it's probably, honestly, in my opinion, maybe Kubrick's strongest film, which is saying a lot. But I mean, just the brief runtime, the overall just structure of it, the script, the character interactions, the way the trial goes, and obviously the ending, which is, I think, one of the best endings in movie history.
I didn't actually remember the ending particularly well until watching it again. And at first, I mean, we'll get to it properly later, but at first, it seems very different from its final outcome, if you see what I mean. It changes so quickly in the space of those few minutes, that whole scene, that dynamic. It's really quite impressive. I think it's important to just realise what Kubrick, his proclivity for retaking shoots and arduous sets and films with massive runtimes. And you are right. The Killing, this, a few of his earlier films, they were structurally tight. They didn't have any fat. They were very, very concise in the way they tried to assert a theme or assert some kind of meaning, and convey that really effective through cinematography and camera movement, as well as just that characterizations. And what he often does is the smaller characters are the ones that will stand out and have great performances. The privates, it's kind of near the start, a bit past the initial stages, when the two privates are to go out and to go near no man's land with the lieutenant. And the lieutenant is this cowardly guy who they've already talked about. One of them went to school with, and they don't think that they like each
and a
other.
drunk.
And he's a drunk, and they go to no man's land, and he sends one of these privates over to this little kind of pothole area to scope things out. Off he goes. He doesn't look particularly happy about it. And then he just starts panicking, the lieutenant, cowardly panicking automatically.
Yeah, because he doesn't immediately come back.
It's not immediate. And the other privates, look, we need to give him more time. It'll be fine. He hasn't been gone that long. Just give him more time. And then, in some hasty overreaction, the lieutenant throws a grenade in the general direction.
They hear gunfire from the other side.
Yeah. And he just immediately panics, throws a grenade, and it turns out once the other private bravely goes into no man's land to find out what's happened to his friend, that the lieutenant's blown up his own man.
Yeah.
It's like, and this is why his later film, Full Metal Jacket, the irony of war is something that Kubrick identifies, Glory as well, very clearly. In those types of films, he makes sure that he identifies the stupidity and moronic nature of what can often happen in war to your own side, your collateral damage. So, and that cowardice, that theme of cowardice, carries on throughout the film and is misplaced and misdirected at times. And that's really what one of the central themes, throughout this film is about that dichotomy of these men who are bravely fighting, who are getting sent off by these officers into horrific circumstances, who are then flipped and blamed and used as scapegoats when the officers' decisions don't go the way they should have gone.
Yeah. I mean, it is basically an institutional indictment of what happens when human lives get reduced to numbers. When we stop looking at the substance and values of human life, and it just becomes a calculation. It's like, it's basically invoked in the scene where General Mireau orders Dax to to give the attack, and he gives him the calculations of, we expect 10% casualties going over the top, and then when you get into no man's land, it's going to be another 15. When you reach the enemy wire, it's going to be another 20, and then when you start storm the hill, it's probably going to be another 20, and that means about 60% casualties, so there should be 40% left to hold the anthill. And it's just this cavalier way of talking about losing half his regiment.
So matter of fact, as if these men they are literally just numbers there to further his career. He's so nonchalant about everything.
Yeah.
Macready plays that character so well. He's classic Kubrick.
Yeah.
True, in the same vein as, say, like a Private Pile, but not as self-destructive. But he even has the Pile stare, or the Kubrick stare at one point, which we carries on through all of his films. But he plays it so wonderfully well, this arrogant, self-absorbed, protectionist general who doesn't care about the people serving under him. All he wants to do is get to the end point where his self-importance becomes more than anything else around him, and that's what Dax is trying to fight and try and negate. But he finds it so difficult. He's basically coerced into going and sending the men and taking them to the anthill in the end by this guy. And even after all of that, there's a scene later on, after the trial's taken place, when he's sat at a table and Dax is told to come in by the other general and sit down. And he's just eating very nonchalantly as if nothing matters. They're talking about these men who just died, have just been executed.
Yeah, they died well.
They died. Yeah, your men died well, Dax. It's like, sorry, your men died well. Wow, what compassion for the man. What bloody compassion. But yeah, he fits that archetype really well. Tell you what's a bit different for a Kubrick film, and that's that the central protagonist in a Kubrick film, at least initially, is often the one who goes a little bit crazy. So Jack Torrance, Private Pile, he gets through lots of his films, but we watch them descend into madness, and then become what they're going to become. With this, we actually center on the hero for once. The guy trying to be the hero and trying to do the right thing. And he is unraveling a little bit because he's trying things that aren't helping his men.
Yeah, his efforts are ultimately futile.
Exactly, completely futile. But at least he's trying to fight against this system, which is so indoctrinated towards making sure the officers are always protected, rather than the grunts on the ground.
Yeah, and I mean, the funny twist in the ending, of course, is that all his efforts are sort of misconstrued by the top general, who sort of sees his efforts against General Mireau as efforts to earn himself Mireau's position, like angling for his command. And when he realizes that no, Colonel Dax actually just wanted to save his men, he sort of scorns him for being an idealist. That there's no room for that in this war, which is, again, another further indictment, because it normalizes that whole numbers game thing, which even, it goes beyond war. It goes to our society in general, in how we build these institutional bureaucracies, whether it's healthcare or criminal justice or whatever, where lives become statistics. Any sort of system that dehumanizes life is sort of an indictment of that, and it does that fairly effectively, I think.
Well, it's the hypocrisy of those in charge, those who will often... at one point, I think Macready's Mireau does say something like, oh, and I love my men, and I want to protect my men, and it's all facade, because really, he's using them as a way to better himself positionally, rather than anything else.
Initially, there is a sympathetic bent to him initially, because initially he does refuse the attack. Initially he does say, no, I can't possibly do it. It's impossible. My men can't do it. The condition they're in, they can't go through this attack. But as soon as the promotion gets dangled in front of him, he goes, no, I'm not doing this for the promotion. If anything, I would reject this command, this attack on that ground. No, it's all because of my faith in my men. They can do the impossible. And there's one of the the most poignant sort of images of the execution when the three soldiers who are eventually indicted for cowardice are shot is because one of them has gotten into a fight the night before when he punched the priest and then got pushed away, and he fell backwards and knocked his head against a pillar and basically cracked his skull, so he's kind of in a like floating in and out of a coma, and he's basically tied to a stretcher as they're
and propped up. It's like
and propped up, and still shot with the rest of them, which is I think that's a really effective image, and also the fact that Dax learns about what happened with that lieutenant who murdered his own man. And then that lieutenant tries to cover it up by picking the corporal who was with him and saw him murder the other man as being the guy to get indicted for cowardice from his company. And then Dax appoints him to be the leader of the firing squad, so that he basically has to look this man that he's condemned to death in the eye as he's basically killing him.
And he says sorry to him just beforehand, doesn't he? And it's like
he does, and there's no resolution there because it doesn't matter. Sentiment. It doesn't matter at that point either. And I think the fact that there's no resolution is another really effective choice by Kubrick. That is to be commended. I really admire this film on a lot of levels. Like it doesn't have like a grand epic scope. It doesn't have. I mean, there are a couple of speeches by Dax, but they're not particularly like stirring.
Well, even the courtroom is pretty concise. I mean, that whole. So they've got the three prisoners, these soldiers who'd been scapegoated and been blamed for Anthill, sat on individual chairs in this massively opulent room with chairs that belong in the 17th century or something. You know, this wonderful Baroque room, and the prosecutor is basically asking them how far did they get past their own wires? How far did you get? We got halfway. Why didn't you go any further? Well, there was two of us left and everyone else was dead. Why didn't you go any further? Well, there was two of us, everyone else was dead. And and it goes on with the other two. Joe Turkel, I think, performance-wise, is really good. Such a distinct voice, and I think his performance is pretty good as that character. But Douglas throughout it.
He's also, I mean, it has to be. Arnaud is sort of the character who gets. They all get pointed or selected for different reasons. So the corporal gets selected because he saw the lieutenant kill his friend
with a grenade.
Yeah, and then there's a guy who gets selected because he's a social undesirable.
Social deviant.
And then there's Arnaud, who's a decorated soldier, but gets selected by drawing straws, because that was the most fair way to determine.
And they're all determined
would be selected.
Too cowardly. But the whole court case, every single time, every opportunity the prosecutor just nails them, and he's trying his best. The colonel, he's trying his best, Dax, to present evidence, to support the soldiers, to even like quote that guy's history and the things he's done, how brave he's been, and every single point, none of the officers cares. The guy in charge just swats away.
Yeah, he's not allowed. He's not allowed to introduce any evidence. There are no. Yeah. There's no stenographer to keep a court record of the proceedings or anything. It's a kangaroo court, basically. Their guilt has already been determined. It's all just a procedure. It's all theatrics. And I mean, Dax knows that, but he still sort of tries to keep up a brave face for the men. And then, of course, he learns that that Mireau actually, when he was spectating the battle from afar, he was so outraged that he saw some of his men still in the trenches, and they couldn't get out of. They were in the trenches still because they couldn't get out of the trenches because of enemy fire. But he's so outraged by it that he orders his own artillery battery to start opening fire on their own troops. And of course, the artillery commander goes, "Say again."
Excuse me.
Yeah, you're gonna open fire on our own troops, and then he goes, "No, I can't do that, not without a fully written order." from the general. Like, I need this in writing, because I don't want the general later to then say, no, I never ordered this. Like, and then leave me with with all the blame. And of course, Mireau does not take kindly to that either. But yeah, Dax gets the testimony from the artillery commander and all the ones who were privy to that phone conversation, and tries to use that as leverage in the trial. Except it doesn't really do anything, except it gives the highest commanding general the impression that Dax is sort of gunning for Mireau's command. And then when he's offered that command, Dax answers with disgust that such a thing could...
Because that's the norm. That's what these officers do. That's all they want, betterment.
That's the game they play. But he wants no part of that, and he absolutely declines the command, much to the general's contempt. And then he goes back out, finds his men at a cafe or a tavern or something, where they brought out a German woman who looks deeply terrified. At being
tears are streaming.
At being prodded out, and then she's made to sing, and they're all raucous and sort of mocking her. And then she starts to sing, and they one by one they start to fall silent, and then they start to sort of hum along to her song. And then sort of the tears start streaming, and as they start humming along to her song, you can see that she changes as well, and that she responds to them, responding to her, and there is a moment there of communion, of community, and fellow humanity. Like, she's the only German. It's also notable that she's the only German that we see and hear throughout the entire film,
and the only woman, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, that kind of goes without saying, given the environment. But the Germans are not shown at all in the film, even during the storming of the anthill. She becomes their only representative at the end, and obviously ties into the fact that that humanity reaches across nationalities and across borders, and that scene cements that really effectively, I think.
No, it does. I mean, like I said, I didn't remember the end, and you see Dax stood outside this tavern looking through, and as you said, they bring this girl on who is supposed to be singing, and she's in floods of tears. And at first, Kubrick uses very tight close-ups of the crowd, who are all being chaotic, aggressive men, shouting and screaming because she's a woman, and just being raucous and making her more afraid. But then as she becomes more comfortable with singing, as she, gains some traction with them, they start humming along. And you get this really memorable moment where, as you said, humanity kind of bleeds across them all, and they understand where they are and what's happened. And soldiers, no doubt, are thinking about, the people they've lost, and some of them start, crying a touch and welling up. And it's got this just really beautiful moment to bring this kind of film, like a bittersweet moment.
Yeah, and the fact that they're all even as she's singing and they're humming, the sergeant comes up to Dax and says, "Oh, we're all being called in for the next attack. So a good number of the men who are sitting in that room are not going to be alive. In a couple of days, which is the cloud that sort of hangs over everything, in the context of World War One. And yeah, I think that ending is amazing. Like, it's perfect. The way it's executed, the way it ties in everything in the film. It's perfection.
Well, it's also got that kind of nod to the cyclical nature of war. All this stuff has happened. All these people have died. The privates have been executed by firing squad. The inhumanity has been most prevalent in the office. All these different things. And then after he says, give them a few more minutes, because he understands they need this for morale, they need this for a moment of humanity before they may die. He walks off, the drum beats kick back in again, the military drums, and he walks into that door, and it's like, right, we go again. Just that constant rotation of war and the way war works and the fact it never stops, regardless of what's happened or what will happen.
Yeah, and the sort of adoring rah-rah patriotism of dying for your country. Yeah, that's completely pointlessly.
Yeah. Well, I think this is, as you said, it's one of those films that's missed. I'm not sure why. I mean, it's Kubrick. It's not like it's really. It's not like we're talking about Koslowski's Canal or something. You know, we're talking about one of the most prominent master auteurs who has ever lived. So it's an odd one for me that it doesn't often appear on those top 10.
I think it might be because of Full Metal Jacket, which is more
Yeah,
recent.
it's also more bombastic. It's probably more relatable to younger audience goers, perhaps. Vietnam is, you know,
Quite possible.
a more seen as a more chaotic war and a more well, a more relevant war in terms of what they may have seen before, perhaps. Whereas World War One is, you know, very, very different. But as you said, I think it's the most concise, well structured, maybe of all his films. Maybe.
I mean, Paths of Glory is about sort of the institution of war, whereas Full Metal Jacket is about the soldier.
Yeah.
And the sort of the deconstruction of the soldier in war. And to me, I mean, I just find, because the institutions are sort of our own constructions, and I find that, and they apply to our own society in all kinds of ways, that I find more compelling on that level than saying Full Metal Jacket, for me. But yeah, I thoroughly recommend this film. Like, it's, as we've talked about, it's only like an hour and 20 minutes. It's really quick.
Really quick, really snappy. It doesn't. It's got, like we said, no fat. It's not. There's no superfluous scenes. The pace is really good.
Yeah, and
has a lot.
It's really effective. It's remarkably well shot. I think probably the scene where Dax first goes out is immediately before he orders the attack on the anthill, when he goes through the trench and the camera tracks him, and you really sort of get a sense of the claustrophobia of the trench. When he
how
goes,
high the walls are and everything.
Yeah, and as he passes by all his troops, that the execution of that shot is just brilliant, and one of the best shots I've ever seen, I think.
For its time, it's quite outstanding. I mean, we're talking 57 here, so yes, you've got all the big epics, swashbuckling epics going on and happening, so you've got the technology there. But for a film which is an anti-war film, which doesn't glorify anything, which is not about being bombastic action sequences, and camera work,
and in which the
really
hero
beautiful.
Pretty much completely fails in his endeavor.
Yeah, the only thing he gets in the end, if Mireau's possible court-martial, maybe, but it doesn't matter because he's lost all these soldiers, and he's lost three
and a couple of minutes,
soldiers.
Couple of extra minutes for his men at the tavern. Those are really the only things he gets.
Tiny little victories where, you know, that might not seem like a lot, but I guess in those kind of circumstances, you'll take any kind of win that you can.
Yeah.
You know. Well, I thought it was great. Like I said, it's the second time I've seen it. I haven't seen it for well over 25 years, maybe. And I kind of thought it'd hold up because it's Kubrick. There's nothing that I've seen of Kubrick that doesn't hold up, apart from the 8 costumes in Planet of the Apes, perhaps. Planet of the Apes, 2001. But yeah, this is a real. If you're a war film fan and you haven't seen this, if you've seen all the obvious stuff, your Apocalypse Nows, your Full Metal Jackets, you know, just take Saving Private Ryan's, all the rest of them. Take a look at this film. It's very different. It's a very unique take on war. It has a very particular viewpoint that we don't see very often, and that's that not just war isn't good. We see that in Apocalypse Now, but the inequality between, it's almost like a class system, the rich and the poor, you know, between the officers and the privates, and how unjust that whole institution at the time was.
And I think it's probably the best film you're gonna see on World War One.
Quality-wise in particular as well.
Yeah,
the way it's shot, the performances, those dollies, man. I just can't stop talking about how good those dolly shots are.
No, yeah.
You obviously see, you know, the signature shot types that he uses, passing on to the rest of his films, but to see them on that scope, but in such a subtly used way, really great.
Yeah,
it truly is. Okay, well, that was Paths of Glory, Kubrick, 1957. get yourselves onto Amazon Prime. I believe that's where I rented it from if you're in the UK, so you can watch it on there. In fact, I think it was free on Amazon Prime without renting it. But it shouldn't be too difficult to find, and it's a wonderful addition to anyone's war collection. Okay, so next week is my choice, and I also decided on a war film, but another war film with a different perspective.
Interesting.
So this is a film that I used to watch quite a lot, and I haven't seen for a bit. I know it relatively well. And that is Roland Joffe's 1984 The Killing Fields.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen it before. I mean, if you know film, a lot of people will. But it's one of those films that again, sometimes goes under the radar. Joffe produced this, directed this, and also directed The Mission, and they're the two kind of big Oscar-winning films that he made.
Yeah.
But there's something about this one that I don't know, it just always hooks me in. So it's about journalists who are covering the Cambodian War, and
with the Red Khmers.
Yeah, the Khmer Rouge. And Diff Prawn is this assistant to Sidney Schamberg, just get that right, who's played by Sam Waterston, and the cast is amazing. Craty Nelson is in it, Julian Sands, John Malkovich. Really amazing ensemble cast. In essence, what happens is Diff Prawn and Schamberg become separated, and the Khmer Rouge captured Diff Prawn, this journalist in essence, who's trying to help bring the knowledge of this to the world so they understand what's happening in Cambodia. And he's captured by the Khmer Rouge and goes through hell. He just goes through hell, and we see it all, and we see the journalists trying to band together, trying to figure out some way of helping him, and they just can't. And that's where I'll leave it, because after that is one of the most poignant moments in cinema history for me. It has me in tears every single time I watch it. And I normally watch these films just a few hours before we do the podcast, so it's fresh in my mind. So I'll probably be in tears. But yeah, next week, 1984's The Killing Fields by Roland Joffe.
Looking forward to it. Hope you'll join us by then. And thanks for watching and for listening. And please, take care of yourselves.
Have a good week, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.